Hello my amazing friends. This story is about one of the biggest families in our community, the Peters family. They built their entire fortune, exporting the finest coffee beans this side of the continent. A true dynasty. But here's the thing. All that wealth, all that influence, couldn't stop the pain. And it certainly couldn't stop what happened next. Before we dive deeper into the secrets, the betrayals, and the shocking fights that followed, take a moment to hit the subscribe button, like, and share this video with your loved ones. Your support means the world to me. Everything, and I mean, started the day Mama Elizabeth passed away. She was the matriarch, the powerhouse, the glue holding that multi-million-dollar empire together. Losing her wasn't just a loss for the Peters, it shook the entire community. At the funeral, you could already see the cracks forming. James, the eldest, stood tall and stoic, ready to take charge. Sarah, the middle child, looked furious, her eyes burning with frustration. And Michael, the youngest, missing for 10 years, had left nothing but a cryptic note. Would he even return? This wasn't just a funeral. This was the opening act of a family disaster. Secrets, betrayals, and fights for power, the Peters family saga was just getting started. James was the eldest son, built like a rugby player, with a serious face that rarely cracked a smile. For the last 10 years, he'd practically run the Peters Group business under Mama Elizabeth's watchful eye. He lived for the business, he breathed the business. Everyone, I mean everyone, assumed James was the heir apparent. He walked around the funeral grounds with this air of resigned authority, accepting condolences, already mentally planning the next quarter's strategy. He had sacrificed his own dreams, gave up that fancy engineering degree, to stay home, and he expected the reward. In his mind, Mama Elizabeth's empire was already his, lock, stock, and barrel. He saw his siblings not as partners, but as necessary, slightly irritating side characters. And then there's Sarah. Oh, Sarah. She's the one I always rooted for. Sharp as a tack, a degree in finance, and she'd actually modernized the company's logistics, something James still used a dusty old ledger for. But because she was the daughter, James constantly talked over her, patted her on the head, and told her to focus on the softer side of the business. Can you believe the nerve? At the wake, she was wearing a beautiful traditional wrap, but her eyes, guys, her eyes were burning. She wasn't just grieving Mama Elizabeth, she was mourning the business future she knew James would never let her build. The tension between those two was so thick you could cut it with a ceremonial dagger. Just as Elder Simon, the family lawyer, started wrapping up the main service, a beat-up old taxi, the kind you only see in the market on Saturdays, rattled up to the mansion gates. And out stepped a man nobody expected, nobody dared to speak of. It was Michael, the youngest son, the baby of the family, who had vanished 10 years ago. He just walked away one morning, left a cryptic note, and never looked back. Mama Elizabeth had tried everything to find him, but eventually, she just shut down that part of her heart. Seeing him standing there, lean and dusty with an ancient backpack, you could literally hear the gasps across the grounds. James went pale, and Sarah let out a little cry that was half relief and half pure shock. Michael didn't say a word. He just walked straight through the crowd, his eyes fixed on the mahogany casket. His clothes were simple, worn, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity James had never learned. He reached the casket, placed a single, freshly picked white flower on top, not the expensive bouquets everyone else had, and then he finally turned to face his family. The stare down between James and Michael was something out of a movie. Years of abandonment, resentment, and unanswered questions hung in the air. Sarah rushed forward and hugged him so tight I thought she might break him. James just stood there, arms crossed, his face a mask of suspicion. "Why are you here, Michael?" James's voice was low and dangerous. 2 days later, the family gathered in the formal sitting room, which smelled faintly of Mama Elizabeth's favorite jasmine tea. Elder Simon, a wizened old man who looked like he knew every secret in the county, cleared his throat, holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. James was sitting forward, ready to sign the papers and take over. Sarah was slumped back, resigned to getting a nice but minor trust fund. Michael, surprisingly, was calm, leaning back like he was watching a play. Elder Simon started reading the will, detailing assets, houses, and the company shares. It was exactly what everyone expected. James got the most, Sarah got a nice chunk, and Michael, well, Michael got a small allowance in a separate clause. James actually smiled. But then, Elder Simon paused, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Now, for the conditions of the inheritance." That's when things got crazy. Mama Elizabeth hadn't just divided the wealth, she had set a test. The will stated that all 3 siblings, James, Sarah, and Michael, must live together on the ancestral estate for 6 full months, starting immediately. And here's the kicker. The person who would truly lead the Peters group wasn't named in the main will. It said, and I quote, "The successor will be revealed by their own actions and by solving the riddle I have hidden in this house." This is the great test. James looked like he'd been slapped. Sarah sat bolt upright, and Michael actually chuckled, a low, knowing sound. Suddenly, the inheritance wasn't a given, it was a competition. And it wasn't about money, it was about Mama Elizabeth's respect. Elder Simon handed James an ornate wooden box. Inside was the first clue. A small, antique key and a note that read, "The fruit of patience is sweeter than the fruit of speed. Find what I always polished, but never kept clean." The tension in that room became unbearable. James was instantly dismissive. "This is childish. A game. The company needs a CEO, not a treasure hunter." Sarah, however, was already looking around the room, her eyes darting to familiar objects. Michael simply watched James's reaction, a faint smile playing on his lips. James immediately rushed out and started tearing through Mama Elizabeth's private office, looking for a dusty, unkempt item she polished. He was thinking of business ledgers, old machines, things related to work. He spent hours throwing papers everywhere, getting frustrated. This was exactly what Mama Elizabeth was testing, his impulse and his inability to look beyond the balance sheet. Sarah, on the other hand, quietly walked to the old dining room, remembering how Mama Elizabeth would always polish the silver service, but the small, brass door knocker on the servants' entrance, which she had used every day, was always weathered and often forgotten. She tried the antique key on the knocker's hinge. Click. Behind the loose door knocker hinge, Sarah found a tiny, rolled-up scroll of parchment. It wasn't about business, it was a poem. It spoke of their childhood, a shared secret between the siblings. It ended with a directive. Where we whispered our greatest fears, you will find the next passage of years. Sarah looked at Michael, who had followed her silently. He knew exactly where that was. It was the old, unused well in the back courtyard, where they used to play hide and seek and tell each other scary stories when they were tiny. James, still upstairs in the chaos of the office, was missing the point entirely. The test wasn't about logic, it was about family memory. As they walked towards the old well, Sarah cornered Michael. "Why did you leave, Michael? Why did you hurt Mama like that?" she asked, her voice cracking. Michael stopped, his face clouding over. "It wasn't what you think, Sarah. I didn't just run away. Mama Elizabeth, she gave me a mission. A secret one." Sarah was stunned. He explained that Mama E had sent him away to track down a long-lost proprietary seed, a special strain of coffee bean that their rivals, the Taylor family, had stolen decades ago. He'd spent 10 years living rough, working undercover, finally confirming the seeds were in a remote, protected valley. Mama Elizabeth had kept his return a secret, knowing it would confuse everyone and protect him. At the well, Michael pointed to a loose stone near the lip. They lifted it, and underneath was a small, lead-lined box. Inside, they found a hand-drawn map of the estate from when they were children. It wasn't the next clue, it was a sentimental piece, a reminder. Sarah realized that Michael's return wasn't about seizing the empire, it was about finishing a mission for their mother. She knew James would never agree to that risk, Michael whispered. He's too focused on the immediate profit. She needed someone who wasn't afraid to go back to the roots. This shared moment, this secret between Sarah and Michael, started to forge a powerful bond between the two overlooked siblings. Meanwhile, James decided he was tired of games. He called an emergency staff meeting, declared himself interim CEO, and started firing people he thought were loyal to Michael or Sarah. He stopped the modernization project Sarah had initiated, citing unnecessary cost. He sold off a small piece of land near the factory that was intended for employee housing. He was trying to assert dominance through brute force, believing that if he controlled the company's daily operations, the stupid riddle wouldn't matter. He told Sarah, "Stick to the household budget, sister. Leave the real work to me." His arrogance was blinding him, and Sarah now knew his ambition was dangerous. Elder John, Mama Elizabeth's most trusted advisor and a man who understood the company's long history better than anyone, watched James's maneuvers with a heavy heart. He knew Mama E's test wasn't just about finding clues, it was about character. He pulled Sarah aside in the garden. "Your mother," he said softly, "valued roots, not just branches. James is pruning the wrong parts of the tree. The next clue, my child, is hidden where the earth is first nurtured." Sarah immediately knew he wasn't talking about the farm, but about the foundations of the estate. Sarah and Michael went to the very first building Mama Elizabeth had bought, a small, dilapidated warehouse she'd transformed into her initial storage unit. It was the place where she taught them about soil and seeds. They went to the cornerstone. Michael, with his decade of working in the field, noticed a small discoloration in the mortar. Using a gardening tool, they carefully chipped away the stone. Behind it was a cavity, and inside, the third clue, a small, leather-bound journal. It contained Mama Elizabeth's business philosophies, her struggles, and her deepest regrets, one of which was trusting a certain person too much. The journal was a goldmine of context. Mama Elizabeth wrote about how James, though capable, lacked empathy and saw people as cogs. She wrote about her admiration for Sarah's quiet competence but feared her lack of self-belief. And she wrote about Michael's sense of duty, the one she had sent on the dangerous mission. The final entry on the last page was the most chilling. The last piece of my legacy rests where betrayal first took root, under the sign of the serpent and the twin moons. They looked at each other. Betrayal. That had to be about the stolen coffee seeds Michael was tracking. James, who had spies everywhere, finally figured out that Sarah and Michael were working together. He overheard a hushed conversation about stolen seeds. Connecting the dots, he realized Michael hadn't abandoned the family, he'd been sent on a mission. This didn't make him angry, it made him terrified. If Michael succeeded, he would not only have the stolen asset but also Mama Elizabeth's undeniable blessing. James knew he had to stop him. He started watching Michael's every move, his ambition turning into outright paranoia. He even hired a private security guard to follow them. Sarah and Michael spent days poring over the estate's blueprints and historical photos, trying to find the serpent and twin moons. Finally, Sarah remembered an old, unused iron gate near the back perimeter that had been sealed off for years. The gate's crest was a coiled, carved snake, the serpent, and on either side of the gate stood two enormous, round water storage tanks, the twin moons. This gate led nowhere but to a dusty, forgotten storage room. This was the place where, decades ago, the Taylor family's mole, the person who stole the seeds, had secretly passed. The storage room was dark and damp, filled with old furniture covered in white sheets. They found the location not by a hidden compartment, but by an inscription Mama E had carved herself into the dirt floor, "Here lies the truth." Digging there, they uncovered a large, heavy wooden box, far bigger than the others. James burst in just as they wiped the dirt off the lid, flanked by his security guard. "Stop. That belongs to me," he bellowed, his face contorted with desperation. Michael stood up calmly, blocking the box. "It belongs to the successor, James. You gave up that right when you started firing the people Mama cared about." A scuffle broke out. James ordered his guard to seize the box. The guard, a loyal former employee of the Peters group who owed James a favor, hesitated, seeing the dirt-stained, intense faces of the siblings. Sarah yelled, "Mama's will forbids interference. You're breaking the rules." James, driven mad by the fear of losing everything he believed was his, shoved the guard aside and lunged for the box himself. As he did, he tripped over a loose brick, and a small, decorative vial he had hidden in his pocket, a vial containing an ancient, powerful African root that traditionally causes misfortune and confusion, clattered to the ground and shattered. He had been planning to contaminate the business records to discredit Michael. The security guard, shocked by James's reckless action and the sight of the shattered vial, backed away. James stared at the broken glass, his plan ruined, the desperation etched on his face. Michael simply shook his head. He and Sarah opened the box together. Inside, there was no key, no deed, no cash. There were 3 things: a handwritten letter from Mama Elizabeth, a certificate confirming the successful recovery of the ancestral coffee seeds, Michael's mission, a small, polished, brass door knocker, a brand new one, identical to the old one, but shining brightly. Michael opened the letter. Mama Elizabeth's beautiful script filled the page. She explained the great test wasn't about finding the clues, it was about the journey and the character revealed during the process. James's actions, the firings, the land sale, the attempt to cheat, showed he only cared for the profits and not the people or the roots. Sarah and Michael, by working together, sharing memories, and protecting the company's ethical heart, proved they understood her true legacy. She confirmed Michael's mission was successful, validating his decade-long absence. But the very last paragraph held the biggest surprise. Mama Elizabeth hadn't chosen Michael, who had the roots, or James, who had the ambition. She named Sarah as the successor. She wrote that Sarah had the perfect balance. James's business acumen combined with Michael's loyalty and the forgotten but essential quality of patience, the quality referenced in the very first clue. The new brass knocker was a symbol. It represented the future, polished and clean, built on the solid, forgotten foundation, the old knocker. She had known Sarah was the only one who could truly modernize the business while preserving the family that ran it. James, defeated, didn't fight. He finally saw the depth of his failure. He was given a significant, but non-controlling, share of the company and a new role focusing solely on international sales, where his sharp ambition could be channeled constructively, away from daily management. Sarah, humble but firm, accepted the role. Her first act was to reinstate the fired employees and dedicate the land James sold to the employee housing project. Michael, the silent hero, was given the title of Chief Agricultural Officer, a role that allowed him to focus on the recovered seeds and the future of their coffee supply, the true root of the business. So, there you have it, guys. The Peters family didn't just inherit a fortune, they inherited a massive life lesson. It wasn't the loudest voice, James, or the one who was gone the longest, Michael, who won the day. It was the quiet, overlooked one, Sarah, who knew how to listen to the past and build for the future, and who knew the importance of her brother's loyalty. Mama Elizabeth didn't want a boss, she wanted a steward. She didn't want a split family, she wanted a partnership. And that's the thing about African tales, right? They're always about something bigger than money. They're about family, and that connection, no matter how dramatic. With wisdom and courage, Sarah proved herself, became the head of the company, and saved the family empire. Lesson: never underestimate your daughter. You can trust her, and she can lead your legacy. Always wins in the end. Let me know what you think of this twisty tale in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this African tale. Tell me, where are you watching from? Please drop your thoughts in the comment section, I'd really love to hear from you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring African stories. And always remember, love, faith, and courage are the greatest treasures you can ever have. God bless you all. Bye.